I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into Dallas Heritage Hall. Not because of the lights or the noise, but because of the silence, the kind that forms when people notice you and immediately decide you do not belong. Then I saw it. My name. Crossed out. A thick line of red ink slashed through Grace Benton on the seating chart, like someone had wiped me out of existence on purpose. And right there in front of cousins, family friends, and strangers, dressed in designer clothes, I heard my father's voice say exactly what he had always believed. She's just a mechanic. Put her at the kids' table. That was the welcome I received at his 65th birthday gala. The gala celebrating my father's 65th birthday sparkled around me. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across white linen tablecloths. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the soft notes of a jazz quartet playing near the bar. Outside, luxury vehicles lined up along the curved driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm glow of the venue. This was the kind of event that made the Dallas social pages, the kind of gathering where oil money met real estate dynasties, and everyone pretended their fortunes were earned rather than inherited. I had dressed simply for the occasion, a black jumpsuit and a light jacket. Nothing flashy. I had learned long ago that showing up in anything too polished would invite comments about trying too hard, and showing up in anything too casual would confirm what they already believed about me. There was no winning with this family, so I had stopped trying to win. A voice cut through the ambient noise behind me. Sharp, practiced, dripping with false concern. Vivian, my stepmother, appeared at my elbow. Her emerald gown probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She leaned close, her perfume overwhelming, and spoke just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "We did not want the smell of motor oil next to the $800 plates," she said. "You understand." I understood perfectly. I had been understanding for 12 years. My father materialized next to her, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit impeccable. Harold Benton looked every inch the Texas patriarch he believed himself to be. He surveyed me with the same expression he might give a stray dog that had wandered onto his property. "Grace," he said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone I knew so well, "you are just a mechanic. Do not try to pretend you belong here. Go sit with the kids at the back table." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Some of them had known me since childhood. None of them spoke up. Avery appeared with her phone already recording. My cousin lived for moments like this, her TikTok followers hungry for glimpses of what she called old money Texas drama. The camera panned to my face as comments began scrolling across her screen. "Who is that? Why does she look so poor? Is she helping?" I did not cry. I had trained myself years ago to count my breaths when the humiliation came. 1, 2, 3. I buried the anger deep, the way I had learned to bury it in the garage when customers questioned whether a woman could actually fix their cars. 4, 5, 6. I remembered being 12 years old, forced to wipe mud off a guest's shoes at one of my father's fundraisers while everyone watched and laughed. The memories threatened to surface, but I pushed them back down. This was not the time. My father waved dismissively toward the rear of the ballroom. "Go on then, do not make a scene." I looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had never claimed me publicly, who had spent my entire life treating me like a mistake he could not quite erase. Then I looked at Vivian, whose lips curled in satisfaction. At Avery, still filming. At Hunter, my younger brother, who stood nearby with a smirk that said he was enjoying every second of this. I turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" My father called after me. "Do not cause problems." I paused but did not look back. "Nowhere. I am leaving so everyone can breathe easier." But in my mind, I was already calculating. They had no idea what they had just ignited. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside. A black SUV idled at the curb, its driver standing at attention. He opened the rear door as I approached and nodded respectfully. "Ms. Benton," he said. I slid into the meticulously crafted high-end interior and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed with a single app custom-built for situations exactly like this one. "Activate Orion Protocol." "A," I said into the phone. A voice on the other end responded immediately. "Confirmed. Cancel all Gala services, lock payment systems, revoke Benton family VIP access. All of it, I said. The call ended. I leaned back against the seat and watched the venue through the tinted window. Any moment now. Inside the ballroom, the lights flickered once, twice, then the entire sound system went dead. Through the glass doors, I could see servers stopping mid-stride, looking confused. The kitchen doors burst open as the head chef stormed out, gesturing wildly. The credit card machine at the bar displayed a single word over and over: declined. My father's face went from confusion to panic in the span of 30 seconds. He grabbed his phone, barking orders at someone, but nothing was working. The investors he had been courting all evening began checking their own phones, frowns deepening. The SUV's door opened. My driver had returned holding an envelope. "Should I deliver this now, Ms. Benton?" I nodded. I watched him walk calmly through the chaos, past the confused servers and the increasingly agitated guests. He approached my father directly, handed him the envelope, and walked away without a word. Harold tore it open. I could not hear what he said, but I could read his lips well enough. His face went white, then red, then a shade of purple I had never seen before. Inside the envelope was a single card. "Ms. Grace Benton, owner of Orion Luxury Motors, wishes you a lovely dinner." Vivian snatched the card from his hands. Her mouth fell open. Around them, the investors who had been promised returns on non-existent oil projects began murmuring among themselves. Someone said the name Orion Motors. Someone else pulled up something on their phone. My father's phone began to ring. He answered, listened for 3 seconds, then ended the call and immediately dialed again. His hands were shaking. By the time my SUV pulled away from the curb, I had 43 missed calls from him, then 50, then 67. I smiled in the darkness of the car. "The dinner has just begun," I said to no one. This was not the first time he had crossed my name off a list, but it would be the last. The phone kept ringing. Harold Benton's name flashed across my screen over and over, each missed call a small victory I allowed myself to savor. I silenced it and turned to look out the window of the SUV as we glided through the Dallas night. The city lights stretched into long ribbons of gold and white, reflecting off glass towers and empty streets. Something about the way they blurred against the darkness pulled me backward in time. My father had not just erased my name from a seating chart tonight. He had erased me from the family long before this gala was ever planned. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. The Benton Ranch sprawled across 1,200 acres of prime Texas land. Rolling hills, championship horses, cattle that had been bred for generations. The locals called us royalty, and my father had done nothing to discourage that perception. Every 4th of July, he opened the property for a massive barbecue. Every Christmas, the ranch house glowed with enough lights to be seen from the highway. The Benton name meant something in our corner of the world, and Harold never let anyone forget it. I was the wrong kind of Benton from the very beginning. While my younger brother Hunter learned to ride horses and wave at potential investors from the back of a pickup truck, I spent my time underneath vehicles. I loved the smell of motor oil, the satisfying click of a bolt tightening perfectly, the way an engine would roar back to life after I figured out what was wrong with it. I understood machines in a way I never understood people. Machines were honest. They broke for reasons you could identify and fix. People were not so straightforward. My father hated everything about my interests. He would find me in the garage, grease on my hands and knees, and his face would twist with disgust. "Benton daughters do not destroy their appearance like this," he would say. "You need to act like a lady." What he meant was that I needed to act like something he could show off at parties, a quiet, polished accessory to the family name. Instead, I was a girl who could rebuild a carburetor faster than most of his ranch hands. I was 12 the first time I truly understood what I was to him. A fundraiser on the ranch, important guests from Houston and Austin, men with oil money and political connections. I had been told to stay out of sight, but I wandered into the garage area where the guests had parked their expensive vehicles. My father found me there examining the engine of a vintage Mustang. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a man in an expensive suit whose shoes were caked with mud from walking across the property. "Clean his shoes," my father said. I looked up at him confused. The guest laughed uncomfortably. "Just a little job for the help," my father explained, winking at the man. She is used to it. I knelt in the dirt and wiped the mud from a stranger's shoes while everyone watched. My hands were shaking not from cold, but from a searing, immediate shame that felt too large for my young body. That moment was not about the mud or the shoes. It was the chilling realization that my father viewed me as a tool to underscore his superiority, a joke he could tell to gain favor. The tears I held back that day were bitter, forging a hard, cold core inside me that the next 12 years would temper into steel. I learned then that my value was zero, a lesson that ironically became the fuel for everything I built. By 17, I had developed a plan. A technical school in Dallas offered a program in automotive engineering. It was not prestigious by Benton standards, but it was exactly what I wanted. I applied for a partial scholarship and spent weeks preparing my application essay about the intersection of mechanical design and emerging technology. I showed my father the acceptance letter with trembling hands, hoping that maybe he would see how hard I had worked. He read it once, then he tore it in half. "No one will marry a girl who fixes cars," he said. "You are embarrassing this family." Hunter had been watching from the doorway. He laughed as the pieces of my future fluttered to the floor. "You belong under cars, not in classrooms," he said. Something broke inside me that night. Not my spirit, though they probably hoped for that. Something else broke, the part of me that still wanted their approval. In its place, something harder began to grow. I was 18 when they threw me out. I had applied to the technical school again in secret this time. When the acceptance letter arrived, I hid it in my room, but Vivian found it while going through my things, something she did regularly, to remind me that nothing in that house truly belonged to me. My father's rage was terrifying. He dragged my suitcase to the front door himself, throwing my belongings onto the gravel driveway. "Take the old truck," he said, hurling the keys at my feet. "Do not come back until you decide to live like a Benton." Vivian stood on the porch, arms crossed, her face arranged in an expression of righteous satisfaction. "When she accepts proper standards," she said, "I will consider opening the door." I left Benton Ranch that night in a 20-year-old pickup truck with a failing transmission and $200 to my name. I did not cry until I was 5 miles down the road. Then I pulled over and sobbed until my chest ached. That was the last time I looked back at the place I had once called home. The years that followed were brutal. I rented a room in a rundown building on the outskirts of Dallas and took a job at a small garage where the other mechanics were men 3 times my age who assumed I would fail. I proved them wrong within my first week, diagnosing a problem with a classic Mustang GT that had stumped them for days. Slowly, I built a reputation. Customers started asking for me by name. I learned to tune high-performance engines, to program electronic control units, to modify vehicles for the local racing community. I was surviving, but barely. Every dollar went toward rent, food, and the classes I took at night to finish my technical degree. My family never checked on me, not once. Occasionally, a distant relative would bring their car to the garage, expecting free service because we shared blood. They never asked how I was doing. They never mentioned that I had been thrown out like garbage. They simply collected their repaired vehicles and drove away without so much as a thank you. When I graduated from the technical program, I sent my father an invitation to the ceremony. His response came through Vivian's assistant. He does not attend graduation ceremonies for tradespeople. I kept that message for years, not because it hurt me anymore, but because it reminded me of who they truly were. The SUV's gentle motion brought me back to the present. My phone showed another 17 missed calls from my father. I scrolled past them without interest. He had never called me when I was struggling in that tiny apartment counting pennies to make rent. He had never called when I was working 16-hour days trying to prove myself in a world that constantly underestimated me. But now, 30 minutes after his perfect gala had collapsed around him, he suddenly needed me. "You think I am still that mechanic?" I whispered to the phone. "You have no idea what I became while you were not watching." The SUV driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Ms. Benton?" "Take the scenic route," I said. "I want to enjoy the night air." A text message appeared on my phone from my assistant at Orion. "Protocol A complete. Awaiting instructions for Protocol B." I typed my response. "Stand by." Then I leaned my head against the cool glass and watched Dallas slide by outside the window. Tomorrow would bring the next phase. But tonight, I allowed myself to remember everything they had done to me, every slight, every dismissal, every moment they had made me feel worthless. They thought they knew who I was. They had no idea. The Dallas highway stretched out before us, its lights cutting through the darkness like promises waiting to be kept. I touched the Orion Motors logo on my keychain, running my thumb over its smooth surface. Such a small thing to represent everything I had built. They called me just a mechanic. But it was that garage, that grease-stained life they mocked, that had taught me how to survive. And eventually, how to thrive. After I left the Benton Ranch, I found work at a place called Martinez Auto in Fort Worth. It was a cramped shop with 3 bays owned by an aging mechanic named Eddie Martinez, who had forgotten more about engines than most people would ever learn. His other 2 employees were skeptical of a young woman joining their crew. "Girls cannot fix cars," one of them said on my first day. "You will probably screw in the bolts wrong." I did not argue with him. Instead, I asked Eddie if I could look at a Mustang GT that had been giving them trouble for 3 days. 40 minutes later, I had diagnosed a faulty crankshaft position sensor, replaced it, and had the engine purring like it was brand new. Eddie nodded slowly. He never questioned my abilities again. I spent 2 years at Martinez Auto, learning everything I could. I worked on high-performance engines for the local racing community. I taught myself how to program electronic control units and optimize fuel injection systems. Customers started requesting me specifically. I was the best mechanic in the shop, and everyone knew it. But I wanted more than maintenance and repairs. I wanted to create. That opportunity came through a startup called StarTorque Electric. They were a small company trying to convert gas vehicles into high-performance electric machines. Their concept was revolutionary, but their execution was flawed. They offered me a position as a technician at a salary that barely covered my rent. I took it anyway. For 2 years, I slept on the floor of the workshop more nights than I could count. I studied their designs until 3 in the morning, teaching myself the engineering principles they assumed I did not understand. I watched their engineers struggle with software problems and hardware failures, taking mental notes on what they were doing wrong. One night, their entire system crashed. A critical error in the powertrain management software had corrupted the prototype's main computer. The engineers spent 4 days trying to fix it before admitting defeat. I asked if I could try. They laughed at first. Then they got desperate enough to let me attempt what they considered impossible. I fixed it in 18 hours. Not just patched it, but completely rebuilt the logic architecture from scratch. When the CEO tested the prototype the next morning, he stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Who taught you to code like that?" he asked. "YouTube," I said, "and a lot of late nights." He promoted me to Chief Technology Officer within a month. It was a fancy title for a company that only employed 12 people, but it gave me access to everything. The designs, the patents, the investor pitches. I rebuilt their prototype from the ground up. I called the project GR1, my initials encoded into the vehicle that would eventually become the Orion X1. The car could accelerate from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Its electric motor was quieter than anything else on the market. Its interior featured hand-stitched Italian fabric and trim, and an AI system I had programmed myself. Then the CEO made a terrible mistake. He had been gambling with company funds for months, and when the investors discovered the discrepancy in the books, StarTorque Electric began its rapid collapse. Creditors circled, employees quit. The prototype sat unfinished in a warehouse, while lawyers argued over who owned what. The board offered to sell me the entire company for a fraction of its potential value. They thought they were dumping worthless scraps onto someone too naive to know better. I emptied my savings account. I sold the old truck my father had thrown at me like garbage. I borrowed money from a small investment fund run by a woman who had once seen me work on her Mercedes and believed I was capable of extraordinary things. 3 weeks later, I owned everything: the patents, the prototypes, the designs I had created during all those sleepless nights. I renamed the company Orion Luxury Motors. The next 5 years were a blur of 18-hour days and impossible deadlines. I hired the best engineers I could find and paid them well enough that they stopped asking questions about who was really in charge. I kept my name out of the press releases, out of the Forbes articles, out of everything. The public face of Orion was a carefully constructed corporate entity. Behind it, I pulled every string. The Orion X1 launched to immediate critical acclaim. Automotive journalists called it the future of luxury transportation. Celebrities and tech executives placed orders months in advance. Our revenue quadrupled in the first year and continued climbing. By year 3, Orion Luxury Motors was valued at over $3 billion. By year 5, we had contracts with private collectors, entertainment moguls, and even preliminary agreements with defense contractors interested in our silent engine technology. The world knew Orion as a mysterious success story. They did not know that its founder still drove an old pickup truck when she wanted to remember where she came from. My family remained completely oblivious. Hunter would brag to his friends about his pathetic older sister who worked in a dirty garage somewhere in Dallas. Vivian would tell her socialite circle that the family's only failure had fortunately removed herself from their presence. My father never mentioned me at all. When his invitation to the gala arrived, I almost threw it away without reading it. But then I saw the note he had included. Dress appropriately. Do not embarrass the family. I held that card for a long time, feeling its weight in my hands. 12 years of silence. 12 years of pretending I did not exist. And now he wanted me to show up and behave. Something cold and certain settled in my chest. I would attend, but not to make peace. The SUV stopped in front of Orion Motors headquarters. Glass and steel towers rose against the Dallas skyline, their windows reflecting the stars. Inside prototype vehicles gleamed under carefully designed lighting. Engineers worked through the night on projects that would reshape the automotive industry. I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking against the polished stone floor. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. They knew me only as the founder, the architect of everything they worked on. None of them knew about the Benton Ranch or the girl who had been thrown out with nothing but an old truck and broken dreams. My assistant met me at the elevator. "Protocol B is ready," she said. "Financial freeze and identity reveal packages are prepared." I stepped into my office on the top floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Dallas spread out below me like a map of possibilities. "Activate Protocol B," I said. "Tonight is not just about the gala. Tonight is the night I take back my name." The screen on my desk lit up with a single message. Orion Protocol B. Financial freeze plus identity reveal prepared. I had spent 12 years building an empire in silence. Now it was time for my family to see exactly what they had thrown away. The Benton Ranch still looked impressive from the outside. White fences stretching toward the horizon, horses grazing in carefully maintained pastures, a main house that had been featured in architectural magazines for its blend of traditional Texas grandeur and modern luxury. But I knew what lay beneath the surface now. While I built Orion Motors from nothing, I had also built something else. An intelligence network. Corporate partnerships that gave me access to financial records most people could never see. Relationships with bankers and lawyers who trusted me with sensitive information because they knew I would never betray that trust. 6 months ago, I had started looking into my family's finances. What I found was devastating. The Benton Ranch was drowning in debt. $48 million owed to various creditors accumulated over nearly a decade of failed investments in oil projects that never produced a single barrel. The cattle operation that had once been the family's pride was hemorrhaging money. The championship horses had been quietly sold off, replaced with lesser animals that most visitors could not distinguish from the originals. My father had been running a sophisticated deception for years. He presented false financial statements to potential investors, inflating revenue figures and inventing assets that did not exist. He had created an energy investment fund called the Benton Energy Expansion Project, soliciting millions from wealthy Dallas families based on drilling permits he had never actually obtained. The land he claimed to be developing sat untouched. The permits had been denied 4 times because the proposed drilling site was located in a protected conservation area. In short, Harold Benton was running something dangerously close to a Ponzi scheme, taking new money to pay off old debts. lying to everyone who trusted the Benton name. And tonight's gala was designed to bring in $8 million more from investors who had no idea they were being defrauded. I watched the chaos unfold through security cameras I had access to as a major shareholder in the hotel chain hosting the event. The scene backstage was exactly what I expected. Vivian paced frantically while staff members scrambled to explain why none of the credit cards were working. Harold barked orders into his phone, his face growing redder with each passing minute. The head chef had already left after his payment was declined. Half the serving staff were demanding cash before they would continue working. In the main ballroom, investors sat at their tables with growing confusion. They had come expecting an elegant evening of fine dining and profitable networking. Instead, they were watching the Benton family implode in real time. Avery had started a live stream an hour earlier, proudly showing off what she called the most exclusive gala in Texas. Her followers were now watching kitchen staff argue with management about unpaid invoices. Someone had captured footage of a waiter telling a guest that the Benton account had been flagged for suspicious activity. The comments on her feed were brutal. "Old money families cannot pay their bills. This is embarrassing." "Are they broke?" Hunter had retreated to a corner of the ballroom, his face pale and sweating. I knew things about him, too. The $1.3 million he had borrowed from a predatory lending operation at 28% interest. The 3 missed payments that had representatives of that organization making increasingly threatening phone calls. The technical documents he had stolen from Orion Motors 2 years ago, thinking I would never trace them back to him. Vivian's own secrets were just as damning. The charity foundation she ran was little more than a money laundering operation, funneling Gala proceeds into personal accounts that funded her designer wardrobe and spa treatments. The Hermès bag she carried tonight was counterfeit. The diamond necklace around her throat had been purchased on credit she could not afford to repay. They had spent years looking down on me, calling me worthless, telling anyone who would listen that I was an embarrassment to the family name, all while they drowned in debt and deception. I moved through the backstage area like a ghost. No one noticed me because no one expected me to be important. I was just a mechanic, the family embarrassment, the girl who belonged under cars instead of at the VIP table. I heard Vivian's voice before I saw her. She was berating a server who had just informed her that the wine delivery could not be completed without payment. "Do you know who we are?" she hissed. "This is the Benton family. We have been hosting events in this city for 50 years. The server shrugged apologetically. "Ma'am, our system shows the account has been frozen. I cannot authorize anything without payment." Vivian turned to Harold, her composure cracking. "They know. Someone knows about the fund." Harold grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a private corner. "No one knows anything. This is just a technical problem. We will handle it." But I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I had seen in my own reflection all those years ago when I was sleeping on garage floors and counting pennies for food. The difference was that my fear had been honest. Theirs was built on a foundation of lies. I slipped past them and found a quiet spot near the emergency exit. My phone buzzed with an update from my team. Benton financial data compilation complete. Debt levels exceed initial estimates. Evidence of fraud is comprehensive. I typed back a single word. Ready. They had called me worthless my entire life. They had thrown me out with nothing and never looked back. They had built their empire on deception while I built mine on innovation and hard work. Tonight, those 2 worlds would collide. I stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the main ballroom. The gala lights flickered overhead, unstable and struggling, just like the family that had organized this farce. Grace. I turned. Vivian stood a few feet away, her face a mask of barely contained panic. "What are you doing back here?" she demanded. "Your father told you to leave." I met her gaze steadily. I came back to see the show. What show?" I smiled. "The one where everything falls apart." Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away. Behind me, I heard her calling for Harold. There was genuine terror in her voice now. She should be afraid. This was just the beginning. The ballroom had descended into chaos. Waiters stood motionless near empty serving stations. The jazz quartet had packed up their instruments and left when their payment failed to process. Guests clustered in confused groups, checking their phones and whispering to each other. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped despite the Texas heat outside. I watched from the shadows near the back entrance, satisfied but not yet finished. Protocol A had accomplished its immediate goals. Every service connected to the gala had been disrupted. The catering, the entertainment, the hotel's VIP amenities, all of it traced back to contractual relationships with Orion Motors that I had deliberately cultivated over the past 3 years. When I became a major investor in the Lone Star Grand Hotel chain, I made sure our agreements included provisions for emergency service suspension. The legal language was buried in dozens of pages of corporate contracts that most people never bothered to read. But I had written those clauses myself, knowing that someday they might prove useful. That day had arrived. My driver delivered the envelope exactly as instructed. I watched my father tear it open with shaking hands, watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. The business card inside was simple. My name, my title, the Orion Motors logo. For the first time in his life, Harold Benton was looking at proof that his worthless daughter had become something he could not control. But Protocol A was only the beginning. I retreated to my SUV and opened my laptop. The screen displayed a dashboard of information that would have made most corporate intelligence teams envious. Bank records, credit reports, property assessments, email archives, all of it legally obtained through my business relationships and investment partnerships. I dialed my assistant at Orion headquarters. "Move to Protocol B," I said. "Execute the financial freeze." Her response was immediate. "Initiating now." Protocol B attacked on 3 fronts simultaneously. First, I revoked all service agreements between Orion Motors and Benton Industries. My company had been providing luxury vehicle maintenance for the Benton fleet as part of a larger corporate partnership. That partnership ended at 9:47 p.m. Second, I triggered a fraud alert through my contacts at First Texas Bank. The evidence I provided showed irregularities in the Benton Energy Expansion Fund that any competent investigator would recognize as criminal. The bank's compliance department responded by freezing the fund's operating accounts pending review. Third, I canceled every VIP privilege the Benton family had accumulated through their association with businesses I controlled or influenced. Their preferred parking lanes at 3 different hotels, their complimentary suite access at the Lone Star Grand, their courtesy memberships at 2 country clubs that relied on Orion Motors for fleet vehicles. In the span of 30 minutes, I dismantled the infrastructure of convenience that had allowed my family to present themselves as Texas royalty. Inside the ballroom, the consequences arrived in waves. A server approached Harold with a tablet displaying a message. I could not hear what was said, but I saw my father's face go white. Then he pulled out his phone and began making frantic calls that no one was answering. Vivian attempted to calm the guests with assurances that everything was fine, just a minor technical difficulty. But the investors had already started talking among themselves. Several of them had received alerts from their own banks about the Benton fund freeze. "Mr. Benton." A tall man in an expensive suit approached my father. His name was Rodriguez, and he had contributed over $2 million to the energy fund 6 months ago. "Why is my bank telling me there is a fraud investigation?" Harold tried to maintain his composure. "There is no fraud investigation. This is clearly some kind of mistake. Then why are all your credit lines frozen?" The question hung in the air. Other guests had stopped talking to listen. "This is a technical issue," Harold insisted. "My daughter caused some problems earlier, and we are sorting it out." "Your daughter?" Rodriguez frowned. "The one you called a mechanic. She has some kind of vendetta," Harold said quickly. "She is not well, mentally unstable." I smiled in the darkness of my SUV. He was already trying to blame me for his own crimes. Rodriguez did not look convinced. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Around him, other investors did the same. Avery's live stream had become a disaster. She had intended to showcase the glamour of the Benton family, but instead was broadcasting their humiliation to thousands of viewers. Comments flooded her feed. Is this family actually broken? Why are they blaming their daughter? What is Orion Motors? Someone had done a quick internet search and posted the results. Orion Luxury Motors, $3 billion valuation, maker of the X1 supercar, CEO unknown. Avery stared at her phone with growing horror. She tried to end the stream, but the video had already been screen recorded and reposted across multiple platforms. I had not planned that particular consequence, but I appreciated its poetic justice. My phone buzzed with an update from my team. Protocol B complete. All target accounts are frozen. VIP access revoked. Service contracts terminated. I typed my response. Prepare Protocol C. Evidence compilation. Then I opened the door of my SUV and stepped out into the warm Texas night. It was time to go back inside. The security guards at the entrance recognized me from my earlier expulsion. One of them moved to block my path. "Ma'am, Mr. Benton asked that you leave the premises." I held up my phone displaying a document that identified me as a major shareholder in the hotel chain. "I have a legal right to be in any public area of this property. Would you like me to call your management?" The guard hesitated. Then he stepped aside. I walked through the doors and into the chaos I had created. Harold saw me immediately, his face contorted with rage as he pushed through the crowd toward me. "You," he snarled. "You did this." I met his gaze calmly. "Did I do? You destroyed my gala. You froze my accounts. You." I raised an eyebrow. "I am just a mechanic. How could I possibly do any of those things?" For a moment I thought he might actually strike me. His hand rose slightly before he caught himself. We were surrounded by witnesses, many of them holding phones that were likely recording everything. Rodriguez approached us, his voice sharp. "I suggest you calm down. There are a lot of witnesses here, and several of them are recording." Harold stopped short, his chest heaving. "Get her out of here. She is not family. She has no right to be at this event. Actually, I said I do have rights here, several of them in fact. But that is not why I came back. Then why Vivian demanded. To humiliate us, to gloat about whatever pathetic sabotage you think you accomplished." I looked at her steadily. "No, I came back to say something I should have said a long time ago." The room fell absolutely silent. The ballroom lights flickered uncertainly as I stepped back through the entrance. Half the chandeliers had dimmed to emergency power. The elegant atmosphere my father had spent months cultivating had dissolved into confusion and barely suppressed panic. I stood in the doorway for a moment, allowing my eyes to adjust. I had changed nothing about my appearance, but the silence that followed my arrival was immediate and profound, setting me apart from the chaos. I walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom, letting every footstep echo against the darkened stone floor. The guests parted before me like water around a stone. Vivian noticed me first. Her face went through 3 distinct emotions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, fear. "She is back," she hissed to Harold. That ungrateful girl came back. My father turned and I watched years of carefully practiced composure evaporate in an instant. "Who gave you permission to return?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Who let you back in here?" "I came back to watch," I said finally. "The show is just getting interesting." Harold's face reddened. "Show? What a show! You think this is funny? You have destroyed months of planning." "No." I stopped about 10 feet from him. "I think it is finally honest." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rodriguez moved closer, his arms crossed, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Vivian pushed forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "You do not belong here. You have never belonged here. You are just a dirty mechanic who cannot accept her place." I tilted my head slightly. "My place. What exactly is my place, Vivian? Certainly not among respectable people." She gestured at my simple black jumpsuit with obvious disdain. "Look at you. You probably came here straight from some greasy garage." "Actually," I said calmly, "I came from an executive meeting, but I appreciate your concern about my wardrobe." Something in my tone made her hesitate. The guests around us had stopped pretending to have private conversations. Everyone was listening now. Avery appeared at Vivian's elbow, her phone raised. She was live streaming again, apparently unable to resist documenting the confrontation. "This is the girl who ruined our family gala," Avery announced to her audience. "Can you believe she had the nerve to come back?" Comments began scrolling across her screen. I caught a few of them. Why is she so calm? She does not look like a mechanic. Who is she really? I looked directly at Avery's camera. You might want to turn that off before you broadcast something you cannot take back. Avery laughed nervously. Like what? Your sad attempt to crash our party. Like the truth about how your family has been running a fraudulent investment fund for the past 3 years. The words hung in the air. For a moment no one moved. Then Harold charged toward me, his composure completely shattered. You are lying, Little. You do not know anything. You are just a bitter, ungrateful child. Mr. Benton. Rodriguez stepped between us, his voice sharp. I suggest you calm down. There are a lot of witnesses here, and several of them are recording. Harold stopped short, his chest heaving. Get her out of here. She is not family. She has no right to be at this event. Actually, I said I do have rights here. Several of them, in fact. But that is not why I came back. Then why Vivian demanded. To humiliate us. To gloat about whatever pathetic sabotage you think you accomplished. I looked at her steadily. No. I came back to say something I should have said a long time ago. The room fell absolutely silent. I took a breath and let 12 years of suppressed anger and pain crystallize into words. I am not a member of the Benton family, I said clearly. I never have been. Harold snorted. Finally something we agree on. But I kept talking as if he had not spoken. I was never included in family photographs, never acknowledged at public events, never given a place at the table during holidays or celebrations. When people asked about the Benton children, my father always said he had one son. He never mentioned a daughter. That is because you were an embarrassment, Vivian snapped. You refused to act like a proper young woman. You chose to wallow in engine grease instead of... I interrupted, to do the only thing I was good at. And you punished me for it every single day of my childhood. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This was not the kind of drama they had expected when they accepted invitations to a luxury gala. I continued, my voice steady, despite the memories threatening to overwhelm me. When I was 12, my father made me clean a guest's shoes in front of a crowd of investors. When I was 17, he tore up my college acceptance letter because he did not approve of my career choice. When I was 18, he threw me out of the house in the middle of winter with nothing but an old truck and the clothes on my back. Grace Harold started. I did not stop. For 12 years, I built a life on my own. No help from you, no support from any member of this family. I worked 18-hour days. I slept on garage floors. I earned every single thing I have through my own effort and intelligence. This is pathetic. Hunter had reappeared from wherever he had been hiding. You crashed Dad's birthday party to tell everyone how unfair your life was. Nobody cares. I turned to face him. Hello, Hunter. How is that $1.3 million loan working out for you? The one from the organization that has been threatening to break your legs if you miss another payment. His face went white. How do you know about that? I know a lot of things, I said. I know about the drilling permits that were never approved. I know about the inflated financial statements that were sent to investors. I know about the emails where your parents discussed how to deceive the people in this room. You are lying, Vivian shrieked. Harold, make her stop. But Harold had gone very quiet. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before on his face. Fear. Who are you? He whispered. I smiled. That is the question, is it not? Before I could say more, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man in an expensive suit was pushing through the crowd, heading straight for me. Ms. Benton. He nodded respectfully. I apologize for the delay. I recognized him immediately. Chad, my head of financial operations at Orion Motors. No apology necessary, I said. Your timing is perfect. Harold stepped forward aggressively. Who is this? What is going on? Chad positioned himself between Harold and me, his presence calm but unmistakably protective. Mr. Benton, I represent Orion Motors. I would advise you to maintain a respectful distance from our principal. Your principal. Harold looked confused. What does Orion Motors have to do with any of this? I held up my hand before Chad could respond. That is enough for now. Rodriguez stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Wait, why would Orion Motors send a representative to protect you? Who are you to them? I met his gaze steadily. That, Mr. Rodriguez, is a conversation for another time. The ballroom speaker system crackled to life, interrupting our confrontation. We apologize for the inconvenience. A recorded voice echoed through the space. Due to unforeseen circumstances, this event will be concluding early. Please proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion. Harold whirled around looking for someone to blame. Who authorized that? Who is controlling my gala? I turned and walked toward the elevator, Chad falling into step beside me. Grace, my father shouted after me. Grace, stop. We are not finished. I paused at the elevator doors and looked back at the ruins of his celebration. You are right, I said quietly. We are not finished, not even close. The elevator doors closed on his furious, terrified face. The elevator deposited us on the 23rd floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Dallas glittered like a circuit board, all precise lights and ordered streets. Up here, everything looked controlled, manageable. But downstairs, the world my family had built was falling apart. My phone buzzed constantly. Harold? Vivian? Numbers I did not recognize. I silenced it without looking. Chad walked beside me through the executive conference suite, a space I had designed specifically for moments like this. Screens displaying real-time data. Prototype models under carefully calibrated lighting. Everything arranged to project power and precision. They are requesting an audience, Chad said. Rodriguez and several other investors. They want to know who you are. I know what they want. What should I tell them? I considered it for a moment. Bring Rodriguez up. Just him. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. Rodriguez stepped out, his expression a mixture of curiosity and calculation. He had made his fortune in commercial real estate, and men like him did not become wealthy by missing obvious opportunities. Thank you for joining me, I said. He looked around the conference suite, taking in the Orion, branding the prototype displays the obvious expense of every surface. This is impressive, but you have not answered my question. Who are you? I gestured toward a chair. Please sit. This might take a moment. Rodriguez remained standing. I have known the Benton family for 15 years. Harold always described his daughter as troubled, unstable, someone who threw away her potential to play with engines. He paused. You do not seem troubled or unstable. Appearances can be deceiving, I said. In both directions. Meaning what? Meaning that my father has been deceiving everyone for longer than you realize, and I am not the person he told you I was. Rodriguez crossed his arms. Then, who are you? I reached for a USB drive sitting on the conference table. The small device contained files that only 2 people in the world had access to. I was one of them. I plugged it into the main display system. The screens around us lit up with the Orion Motors logo. What you are about to see, I said, is confidential. It is also the truth. The first video showed a workshop from 5 years ago. A young woman with grease-stained hands stood before a whiteboard covered in engineering diagrams. She was explaining the power distribution system for an electric vehicle prototype. The young woman was me. Rodriguez leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. That is you. Yes. The video continued, showing footage from various stages of Orion's development. In each clip, I was at the center, directing engineers, testing components, signing documents. I paused the playback on a frame showing the company's official registration papers. The founding signature was clearly visible. Grace Hale, I said, formerly Grace Benton, Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Orion Luxury Motors. Rodriguez sat down heavily in the nearest chair. You are the founder of Orion. 87% ownership, I confirmed. Total company valuation as of last quarter, $3.4 billion. But, he struggled to process the information. Harold said you were working in some garage somewhere, that you were barely getting by. I smiled slightly. Harold says a lot of things that are not true. The door to the conference suite burst open. Harold, Vivian, and Hunter tumbled through, followed by 2 hotel security guards who were clearly uncertain about whether they should intervene. Grace Harold shouted, "What is the meaning of this? What lies have you been telling?" Rodriguez stood blocking their path. "Mr. Benton, I suggest you calm down. Do not tell me what to do on my own." Harold stopped, suddenly aware of his surroundings. "Where are we?" "This is not part of the hotel. This is a corporate executive suite," I said calmly, "reserved for major shareholders." "Which I am." Harold stared at me. then at the screen still displaying Orion's founding documents, then back at me. "No," he said slowly. "No. That is impossible. You are just a mechanic. You cannot possibly." I stood smoothing my jacket. "Let me explain something, Harold. I called you by your first name deliberately, watching him flinch at the disrespect. When you threw me out of the ranch 12 years ago, you thought you were discarding someone worthless. What you actually did was release me from the only thing holding me back." "This is ridiculous," Vivian interjected. "You expect us to believe that you somehow became a billionaire without anyone noticing." "I did not become a billionaire for you to notice," I said. "I became one for myself. The fact that you were completely oblivious is just proof of how little attention you ever paid to me." Hunter tried to regain some composure. "Even if this is true, so what? You have money. Congratulations. That does not change what you are doing tonight. You are sabotaging our family out of petty revenge." I walked toward him slowly, watching him shrink back, despite trying to appear confident. "Petty revenge," I repeated. "Is that what you think this is?" I stopped a few feet away. "Do you want to know what I think, Hunter? I think that 12 years ago, you watched your father throw your sister out into the cold, and you laughed about it. I think you have spent every day since then enjoying privileges that were built on fraud and deception. And I think that when you stole technical documents from my company 2 years ago, you assumed I would never find out." His face went gray. "I do not know what you are talking about." I turned back to Rodriguez. "The evidence I mentioned earlier, about the fraudulent investment fund. I have compiled comprehensive documentation, bank records, emails, financial statements that prove intentional misrepresentation." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I want to see everything." Harold stepped forward desperately. "Grace, wait. Whatever you think you know, we can discuss this. As a family." I looked at him, the man who had never acknowledged me in public, who had made me clean strangers' shoes for his amusement, who had torn up my acceptance letter and thrown me away like garbage. "You are not my family," I said quietly. "You never were." Then I turned to the screens and pulled up a new set of documents. "Let me show you what the Benton family really looks like when you examine their finances." The next hour was devastating. I walked Rodriguez through every piece of evidence. The fake drilling permits, the inflated revenue projections, the emails where Harold and Vivian discussed how to deceive their investors. The loan documents show Hunter's debt to dangerous creditors, the charity fund that had been used to launder Gala proceeds. By the end, Harold had collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Vivian was weeping openly. Hunter stood motionless, staring at the screens as if hoping they might spontaneously combust. Rodriguez made 3 phone calls during my presentation. By the time I finished, he had already contacted his attorney and 2 other major investors. "I want my money back," he said to Harold, "all of it, and if I do not get it, I will be filing charges." "You cannot." Harold started. "I can and I will." Rodriguez moved toward the elevator. "I trusted you because of your family name. That was clearly a mistake." "Wait," Harold called after him. "Please, I can explain everything." Rodriguez paused at the elevator doors. "There is nothing to explain. You defrauded me. Your daughter is apparently a genius. Those are the only facts that matter now." The doors closed behind him. Harold turned to me, desperation replacing his earlier arrogance. "Grace, please, whatever you want. Money, recognition, a place in the family. I will give you anything." I looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had shaped so much of my pain and my determination. "I do not want anything from you," I said finally. "I stopped wanting anything from this family a long time ago." "Then why?" Vivian wailed. "Why are you destroying us? I am not destroying you. I am showing the world what you really are. There is a difference." Hunter spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. "So what happens now?" I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. "Now the truth is out. What happens next is up to the people you defrauded. You cannot prove fraud," Harold said, grasping at straws. "It is your word against ours." I smiled. "Actually, I have documented evidence of every fraudulent transaction your company has made in the past 5 years. I am sending it to the SEC, the IRS, and the Texas Financial Crimes Unit tomorrow morning." His face went completely white. "Grace, please, you will destroy the family name. Everything our ancestors built. Your ancestors built nothing, I said. They inherited land and pretended it made them special. The only real legacy you are leaving is a warning about what happens when arrogance meets accountability. I walked toward the elevator, then paused. One more thing. The evidence about Hunter's loan from organized crime, that is going to law enforcement as well. He might want to start looking for a good attorney. Hunter made a strangled sound behind me. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and turned to face my former family one last time. Goodbye, Harold. Goodbye, Vivian. I hope you find some way to make peace with what you have done, but I suspect the next few years are going to be very difficult for all of you. The doors closed on their devastated faces. The elevator descended toward the lobby, but I pressed the button for the 19th floor instead. The private conference suite there had been prepared for this exact moment. Rodriguez insisted on following me. He had more questions, and I had more answers to provide. The other investors could wait. The 19th floor suite was smaller than the executive space above, but no less impressive. Orion prototypes lined one wall. Engineering awards and patents decorated another. Everything here told a story of innovation and excellence. I need to understand, Rodriguez said as he settled into a premium leather chair. You built all of this from nothing, while your family thought you were working in some backwater garage. Not nothing, I corrected. I had skills, knowledge, determination. What I did not have was anyone who believed in me. Someone must have invested. $3 billion does not materialize from thin air. I nodded. There were people along the way who saw potential when my family saw only failure. A woman who ran a small investment fund. An engineer who recognized my designs were years ahead of the competition. But the initial capital came from selling everything I had, including the old truck my father threw at me when he expelled me from the ranch. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. Harold always said you were bitter, damaged, that you could not handle the responsibilities of being a Benton. Being a Benton meant being complicit in fraud, I said. I chose a different path. The elevator chimed and Chad stepped out. Behind him came Harold, Vivian, and Hunter, escorted by hotel security, who had clearly been instructed to bring them whether they wanted to come or not. What is this? Harold demanded. You cannot hold us here. No one is holding you, I said. But I thought you might want to see the rest of the presentation before you make any decisions about your next steps. What presentation? Vivian asked, her voice trembling. I gestured toward the display screens, the full story of how your mechanic daughter became one of the most successful automotive executives in the country. The screens came alive with video footage and documents. I had spent months compiling this record, knowing that someday it might be needed. The first segment showed my early days at Martinez Auto, grainy security camera footage of a young woman working under a vintage Mustang while older men watched skeptically. Then the same woman emerged, wiping her hands as the engine roared to life. That was my first week, I said. They did not think I could do it. The footage continued. My time at Star Torque Electric. The sleepless nights. The breakthrough that saved the company. The moment I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer. Then came the pivot point. The company's collapse due to executive mismanagement. The desperate sale to anyone willing to take on the debt. My decision to buy everything with borrowed money and my own savings. I watched my family's faces as the story unfolded. Harold looked like he was watching a horror film. Vivian's mascara had completely dissolved. Hunter had not moved in several minutes. The climax of the presentation was the launch of the Orion X1. Critical acclaim, celebrity endorsements, revenue that exceeded projections by over 500% in the first year. You built this? Rodriguez said quietly. All of this, every design, every patent, every line of code. I built it while working 18-hour days and sleeping on workshop floors, while my family told everyone who would listen that I was a failure. Harold found his voice. Grace, we did not know. You did not want to know, I corrected. You never once asked how I was doing, never once checked to see if I was alive or dead. You simply erased me from the family narrative because I did not fit your image. The presentation concluded with current footage of Orion's headquarters, hundreds of employees, state-of-the-art facilities, a company that had revolutionized the luxury automotive industry. Then the final slide appeared. A list of patents registered to Grace Benton, now legally Grace Hale. 7 core technologies that powered every vehicle Orion produced. These are mine, I said. Not borrowed, not stolen. Created from my own knowledge and imagination. The kind of knowledge you ridiculed as worthless. Rodriguez stood, his professionalism returning, fueled by the staggering reality of Orion's valuation. Ms. Hale, I have witnessed enough to understand your position, and more than enough to pursue legal action against Mr. Benton. We require the comprehensive documentation you mentioned regarding the fraudulent investment fund. Harold surged forward, fear overriding any sense of propriety. Grace, you can't just hand over everything. We are still family. This is an internal matter. It stopped being an internal matter, Harold, I said, meeting his frantic gaze, the moment you defrauded people who trusted you. I signaled Chad. Chad stepped forward and handed Rodriguez a sleek black drive. This contains all compiled financial data, including email correspondence, bank ledgers, and the denial records for the drilling permits organized and indexed for the SEC and federal investigators. It is the evidence of fraud which speaks for itself. Rodriguez accepted the drive, weighing it in his hand like a verdict. This changes everything, Ms. Hale. You haven't just exposed your family. You've effectively shut down their entire financial operation. I have provided accountability, I corrected. They determined the consequences by their actions. Vivian began to sob uncontrollably, sinking back into her chair. Hunter stood rooted to the spot, staring at the small black drive in Rodriguez's hand. I walked toward the side exit, which led directly to a private lift. Mr. Rodriguez, I have given you the means to recover your investment and ensure justice. What happens now is between the Benton family and the law. Harold, desperate, called out one last time. Grace, stop. I want to talk to you about Orion. We can be partners. We can save the Benton name. I paused my hand on the exit panel and looked at him. The Benton name is not worth saving, Harold. What I built on honesty. Something you never understood. The lift doors opened, and I stepped into the quiet enclosure. As the doors closed, I left the shattered illusion of the Benton dynasty behind me, watching their desperate, defeated faces fade into the silence. The morning sun rose over Dallas like a spotlight illuminating a crime scene, which in many ways it was. I stood at the windows of my Orion headquarters office, watching the city wake up below. In a few hours, the evidence I had compiled would reach the authorities who could act on it. The Benton family's decades of deception would finally face consequences. My phone displayed dozens of missed calls and text messages. Harold begging for mercy, Vivian threatening legal action. Hunter's communications had become increasingly incoherent as the night progressed. I ignored all of them. Chad arrived at 7 with a detailed briefing. The Gala has become national news, he reported. Multiple outlets are covering the collapse of the event and the allegations against the Benton family. Which allegations specifically? So far, mostly rumors about financial irregularities. But several investors have already contacted attorneys. Rodriguez held a press conference this morning calling for a full investigation. I nodded. And the evidence packages, ready for delivery, SEC, IRS, and Texas Financial Crimes Unit, all formatted according to their submission requirements. Send them. The next few hours unfolded with mechanical precision. Each government agency received comprehensive documentation of the Benton family's fraudulent activities. The fake drilling permits, the inflated financial statements, the emails discuss how to deceive investors, the charity fund laundering scheme. By noon, the first responses arrived. The Texas Financial Crimes Unit announced an emergency investigation into the Benton Energy Expansion Fund. The SEC confirmed receipt of materials related to securities fraud allegations. The IRS opened a tax evasion case based on documented discrepancies in reported income versus actual revenue. At 2 o'clock, federal marshals arrived at the Benton Ranch with a warrant to freeze all assets pending investigation. I watched the coverage from my office, feeling surprisingly little satisfaction. This was not about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about ensuring that the people who had defrauded investors, evaded taxes, and deceived the public would finally face accountability. My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. Grace Hale. Ms. Hale, this is Agent Morrison with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We received your submission this morning. I wanted to thank you for the comprehensive documentation. You are welcome. We will likely need your testimony as the investigation progresses. Would you be willing to cooperate? Of course. Whatever you need. One more thing. The agent paused. The evidence regarding Hunter Benton's connections to organized crime. That is being handled by a separate division. They may be reaching out as well. I understand. The call ended. I set down my phone and returned my attention to the windows. Below, the city continued its daily rhythm. People going to work, running errands, living their lives. Most of them had never heard of the Benton family and probably never would. The drama that had consumed my life for 12 years was just a footnote in the larger story of Dallas. But for me, it was the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another. My assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Hale, there is someone here to see you. She says her name is Margaret Chen. She represents the Benton Family Foundation. I frowned. The foundation was Vivian's charity, the one that had been laundering money. What could they possibly want sent her in? Margaret Chen was a small woman in her 50s, with the careful appearance of someone who had spent decades navigating institutional politics. She entered my office with a folder clutched to her chest. Ms. Hale, thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you, Ms. Chen? She took a deep breath. I have worked for the Benton Foundation for 8 years. I believed we were doing good work, helping underprivileged children, supporting local schools, the usual charitable activities. And I recently discovered that much of what I believed was false. She opened her folder. The records I have access to show significant discrepancies. Money that was supposed to go to programs was diverted elsewhere. Donations that never reached their intended recipients. I studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw the news this morning, and I realized that you might be able to do something with this information. She pushed the folder toward me. These are the records I have, internal documents that show where the money really went. I opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. The documentation was damning. Vivian had been skimming from her own charity for years, redirecting funds to personal accounts, hidden behind layers of corporate shells. Why did you not go to the authorities yourself? Margaret looked down. I was afraid. The Bentons have powerful connections. I have a family, children. She met my eyes. But after what I saw last night, I realized that some things are more important than personal safety. I closed the folder. Thank you, Ms. Chen. This will be very helpful. Will you protect my identity to the extent that I can? But I cannot promise anything. These investigations tend to become public eventually. She nodded, accepting the uncertainty. I understand. I just could not stay silent any longer. After she left, I added her documents to the evidence package and forwarded them to the appropriate agencies. One more nail in the coffin of the Benton family's reputation. By evening, the situation had escalated dramatically. Harold Benton was called before an emergency federal hearing to answer questions about his investment fund. He sat alone at the witness table, his attorney having withdrawn that morning due to conflicts of interest. I watched the live stream from my office. The prosecutor asked pointed questions about drilling permits, financial projections, investor communications. Harold fumbled every answer, his arrogance replaced by visible panic. Vivian faced her own interrogation regarding the charity foundation. The documents Margaret Chen provided had revealed a systematic pattern of fraud that stretched back nearly a decade. Hunter was arrested at his apartment that afternoon. The organized crime connection had proven even more serious than I initially suspected. He was facing federal charges related to money laundering and conspiracy. As the sun set over Dallas, I finally allowed myself to feel something other than focused determination. I had spent 12 years building a life separate from the family that had rejected me. Everything I accomplished was earned through my own effort and intelligence. But some part of me had always wondered if they were right, if I really was worthless, if my success was somehow accidental or temporary. Now, watching them face the consequences of their choices, I understood something important. I had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves. I had simply made sure the truth came out. My phone buzzed with a text from Chad. Protocol D complete. All evidence delivered. Investigation proceedings began. I typed back a simple response. Thank you. Then I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness of my office, watching the lights of Dallas flicker to life below. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight I allowed myself a moment of peace. The past was finally settling its accounts. Rodriguez requested another meeting the following morning. This time he was not alone. The conference room on the 23rd floor held nearly a dozen investors, all of whom had contributed significant capital to the Benton Energy Expansion Fund. All of whom had spent the previous 24 hours realizing they had been defrauded. I entered the room to find them already seated, their expressions ranging from anger to confusion to grudging respect. "Thank you all for coming," I said, taking my place at the head of the table. Rodriguez spoke first. "Ms. Hale, before we discuss anything else, I need to know the full truth about your relationship to Orion Motors. You showed me the founding documents yesterday, but the company's public filings list the ownership as a consortium of investment entities. Your name does not appear anywhere." I nodded. That was intentional. When I started Orion, I had specific reasons for keeping my identity private. What reasons? I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. These were successful people. They had built fortunes through careful analysis and calculated risk. They would understand strategic thinking even if they did not approve of the deception. "My father," I said carefully, "made it his mission to ensure that everyone in Dallas knew his daughter was a failure. When I started building Orion, I understood that his narrative could destroy my company before it had a chance to succeed. So you hid," one of the other investors said. "I protected my business. I corrected it. There is a difference between hiding and strategic positioning." Rodriguez leaned forward. "But why reveal yourself now? After 12 years of successful concealment, why choose last night?" "Because the opportunity presented itself. My family's fraud was going to be exposed regardless of my involvement. I simply accelerated the timeline and ensured that the right people received the right information." "And the sabotage of the Gala. That was your doing." "I controlled certain business relationships that affected the event's operations. I exercised those controls at a strategically appropriate moment." A woman at the far end of the table spoke up. Sarah Mitchell, according to the nameplate in front of her. She had contributed over $3 million to the Benton Fund. "Ms. Hale, I appreciate the sophisticated business strategy, but I am still trying to understand the scope of your involvement with Orion Motors. Are you a majority shareholder? A board member? What exactly is your position?" I stood and walked to the display screen at the front of the room. The USB drive from yesterday still contained files that would answer her question definitively. "I am the founder of Orion Luxury Motors," I said, pulling up the first document. "I designed the core technology that powers every vehicle we produce. I wrote the software that controls our autonomous driving systems. I hold primary patents on 7 critical innovations that have been licensed to major automotive manufacturers worldwide." The document scrolled across the screen. Patent registrations, engineering specifications, corporate founding papers, all of them bearing my signature. "I also own 87% of the company's outstanding shares," I continued. "The remaining 13% is distributed among early investors and key employees. No other individual or entity holds a position comparable to mine." The room fell silent. "You are saying," Rodriguez said slowly, "that you personally control a $3 billion company?" "Yes. And you built all of this while your family told everyone you were working in a garage somewhere. I built all of this because my family told everyone I was working in a garage somewhere. The deception I chose was a response to the deception they created. The difference is that mine was legal." Sarah Mitchell shook her head. "This is extraordinary. I have been investing in Texas businesses for 30 years. I have never seen anything like this." I returned to my seat. "What I have shown you is the truth about who I am and what I have accomplished. The question now is what happens next." Rodriguez nodded. The Benton situation is going to become a significant legal proceeding. Several of us are considering civil action to recover our investments. Your testimony could be valuable. I am willing to cooperate with any legal proceedings that seek justice for the people who were defrauded, I said. I will not participate in anything designed purely for punitive purposes. Meaning that I am not interested in destroying my former family beyond what is necessary to address their crimes. I want accountability, not annihilation. The investors exchanged glances. This was not the kind of revenge they had expected from someone who had been publicly humiliated and privately abused for years. Sarah Mitchell spoke again. Ms. Hale, I am curious about something. You clearly had the resources to expose your family at any time during the past several years. Why wait until now? I considered the question carefully. For a long time, I believed that the best revenge was living well, building something meaningful, proving through my actions that their assessment of me was wrong. And something changed. Yes, I saw them preparing to defraud another generation of investors. People who trusted the Benton name the same way you did. I could not stand by and watch that happen. So this was about protecting others, Rodriguez said. Not about settling personal scores. Both I admitted. I will not pretend that exposing my family was not personally satisfying. But if that had been my only motivation, I could have done this years ago, and in a much more destructive manner. The meeting continued for another hour. I answered questions about my technology, my business strategy, and my plans for Orion's future. By the end, several of the investors had expressed interest in potential partnerships. Rodriguez lingered after the others left. One more question, he said. Yes. Your father. When you looked at him last night, watched him realize who you really are. What did you feel I thought about his devastated face? The crumbling of everything he believed about himself and his family, the moment when he finally understood what he had thrown away. Sadness, I said finally, not for what happened to him, for what could have been, for the relationship we might have had if he had been capable of seeing me as a person instead of an embarrassment. Rodriguez nodded slowly. That is more grace than most people would offer in your position. I smiled slightly at the unintentional wordplay. It is who I chose to be. 3 days after the gala, the legal machinery had fully engaged. I watched the proceedings from my office, declining requests for media interviews and public statements. This was no longer my story to tell. The authorities had taken over, and the Benton family was facing consequences that no amount of family influence could deflect. Harold's emergency hearing extended into a second and then a third day. The evidence I had provided formed the foundation of the prosecution's case, but investigators had uncovered additional fraud that even I had not discovered. False tax returns going back nearly a decade, unreported foreign accounts, business dealings with entities that existed only on paper. The federal prosecutor called it one of the most comprehensive financial fraud schemes she had encountered in 20 years of practice. Vivian's charity foundation was dissolved by court order. The documents Margaret Chen provided had exposed systematic misappropriation of funds that totaled nearly $4 million over 8 years. Children who were supposed to receive educational support had been denied resources so that Vivian could maintain her lifestyle. Hunter's situation proved the most serious. His connections to organized crime had not been limited to personal loans. He had been laundering money for a criminal enterprise using Benton family businesses as cover. The charges included conspiracy money laundering and fraud. He was denied bail after prosecutors demonstrated significant flight risk. I received updates throughout the week from Chad, from Rodriguez, from attorneys representing various interested parties. The consensus was clear. The Benton family name, once synonymous with Texas prosperity and respectability, had become a cautionary tale about arrogance and accountability. On the 7th day, I received an unexpected visitor. Harold Benton appeared at the Orion headquarters lobby, looking nothing like the imposing patriarch who had commanded attention at social events for decades. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, his eyes held a desperate quality that I had never seen before. Security called my office. "Ms. Hale, your father is here. He is requesting a meeting." I considered refusing. I had said everything that needed to be said, but something made me agree. "Send him up." Harold entered my office slowly, as if every step required enormous effort. He looked around at the displays of technology and achievement, the visual evidence of everything I had built without his help or approval. Grace. His voice was barely above a whisper. Harold. He flinched at my use of his first name but did not protest. I deserve that. Yes, you do. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. I came to ask you something. Not as your father. I lost the right to that title years ago, as someone who made terrible mistakes and is finally facing the consequences. What do you want to ask? Why did you not destroy us completely? He met my eyes, and I saw genuine confusion beneath the desperation. You had the power, the resources, the justification. You could have erased the Benton name entirely. Instead, you turned over evidence to the authorities and stepped back. Why I considered the question? Because I am not you. What does that mean? It means that I do not believe in revenge for its own sake. What I did was ensure that the truth came out. The consequences you are facing now are the result of your choices, not mine. Harold shook his head slowly. The money is gone. The ranch will be sold to cover legal fees and restitution. Vivian is facing criminal charges. Hunter may spend years in prison. I know. And you feel nothing. I feel many things, I said quietly. I feel sad for the family we could have been. I feel relieved that the deception is finally over. I feel satisfied that justice is being served. But I do not feel the kind of vindictive pleasure you seem to expect. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice breaking. I am sorry, Grace. For everything. For not seeing you. For not believing in you. For throwing you away like you were worthless. I was wrong. About all of it. I looked at the man who had shaped so much of my pain and my determination. The father who had never been a father. The businessman who had built his reputation on lies. The patriarch who had finally been stripped of everything he pretended to be. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. Does it help? I do not know yet. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside the windows, Dallas continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the private drama unfolding in my office. What happens now? Harold asked eventually. That depends on the courts. I cannot influence the proceedings even if I wanted to. The evidence speaks for itself. I meant what happens with us. Is there any possibility of... He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. I thought about 12 years of absence. The nights I spent alone in my tiny apartment wondering if anyone would notice if I simply disappeared. The birthdays and holidays that passed without acknowledgement. The countless small cruelties that had accumulated into something much larger. I do not know, I said honestly. The damage is extensive. It may be beyond repair. Harold nodded, accepting my answer. I understand. He rose slowly from his chair. For what it is worth, I am proud of you. Not because of the money or the success, because you survived what we did to you and became someone remarkable. I watched him walk toward the door, diminished and defeated, but somehow more human than I had ever seen him. Harold. He paused. The formal legal proceedings will take months, probably years. If you want to have real conversations during that time, conversations without lawyers or expectations, I would be willing to consider it. He turned back, surprise evident on his face. Really? No promises, no guarantees, just a willingness to talk. He nodded slowly. I would like that. Then we will see. The door closed behind him. I sat alone in my office, processing the conversation. Something had shifted, though I could not quite identify what. Outside, the sun was setting over Dallas. Another day ending. Another chapter closing. But the story was not finished yet. 6 months passed. The legal proceedings against the Benton family concluded with the outcomes that the evidence demanded. Harold received a 6-year federal sentence for securities fraud and tax evasion. Vivian was placed under house arrest and barred from any charitable work for the rest of her life. Hunter's organized crime connections resulted in a 15-year sentence, though good behavior might reduce that significantly. The Benton Ranch was sold at auction. A technology company purchased the property and announced plans to convert it into a corporate retreat center. The white fences and championship horses were gone, replaced by plans for conference facilities and innovation labs. I did not attend the auction. Some closures do not require physical presence. In the aftermath of everything, I found myself changing in unexpected ways. The determination that had driven me for 12 years softened into something more peaceful. I had spent so long proving my worth that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without constantly defending my right to be. I moved to Miami, not permanently, but for an extended project that had been forming in my mind since the night of the Gala. Something that would give meaning to everything I had experienced and everything I had built. The Grace Hale Technical Academy opened 6 months after the legal proceedings concluded. It occupied a renovated warehouse near the waterfront filled with automotive equipment, computer stations, and workshop space. Every student was a young woman from an underprivileged background. Every curriculum was designed to provide real-world skills in engineering, technology, and entrepreneurship. On the wall of the main workshop, I hung a photograph of my old pickup truck, the one Harold had thrown at me like garbage, the one that had carried me away from the ranch and toward everything I would eventually become. Students asked about the picture sometimes. That was where I started, I would tell them. Everything else grew from there. The academy grew quickly. Graduates found positions at automotive companies, technology firms, engineering consultancies. Several started their own businesses using skills they had learned in our programs. The success stories multiplied. I received a letter from Harold 3 months into my time in Miami. It was written by hand on prison stationery, simple and direct. Grace, I think about you every day. Not the successful businesswoman who testified against me, but the little girl who used to hide in the garage because she felt safer with engines than with people. I should have protected that girl. Instead, I tried to destroy her. That is my greatest shame. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I want you to know that watching you become who you are taught me something about what really matters. Strength is not about controlling others. It is about building something meaningful despite the obstacles. I hope you find peace, real peace, the kind that does not require anyone else's approval. Your father, I read the letter several times. The anger I expected to feel did not arrive. Instead, there was only a quiet sadness for the relationship we had never had and never would. I wrote back a brief response acknowledging his words without offering absolution. Some wounds heal slowly. Some never heal completely. But the absence of healing does not require the presence of hatred. A year after the Gala, I returned to Dallas for a press conference. Orion Motors was announcing a new initiative, a scholarship program for students from the Grace Hale Technical Academy who demonstrated exceptional promise. The company would fund their education at any engineering school in the country. Reporters asked questions about my journey, my family, my motivations. I answered honestly, but briefly. The story had been told. What mattered now was the future. After the press conference, I walked alone through downtown Dallas. The city had changed since my childhood, grown taller and more cosmopolitan, but the Texas sky remained the same endless blue that I remembered from the ranch. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed over the years. The frightened girl hiding in garages, the determined young woman sleeping on workshop floors, the anonymous founder building an empire in secret. The daughter is finally facing her family with the truth. All of them had led to this moment. Standing in sunlight, free from the need for anyone's validation. A notification buzzed on my phone, a message from one of my academy students. Ms. Hale, I got accepted to MIT, full scholarship. I would never have believed this was possible a year ago. Thank you for showing me what I could become. I smiled and typed back a response. You showed yourself. I just provided the tools. The sun was warm on my face as I walked back toward my car. In a few hours, I would fly back to Miami and continue the work that had become my purpose, building something meaningful, helping others discover their own potential, creating a legacy that had nothing to do with family names or inherited wealth. I had spent 12 years proving my worth to people who never deserved that effort. The next 12 would be different. They would be about proving something to myself, that I was more than the sum of my wounds, that success means nothing without purpose, that the best revenge is not destruction, but transformation. The past had settled its accounts. The future was waiting. I was finally ready to see it. If my story has resonated with you, if you have ever been underestimated or dismissed or made to feel worthless, I hope you remember this. Your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. It is determined by who you choose to become when no one is watching.